everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. Ho, ho, holy shit, that was not fun. The victory that could have propelled us into being serious contenders for the title race. Instead, it was yet another disappointing week for myself, David Edgar, and for David Graham to discuss. Hello, Davey.
Good afternoon, Davey. Good afternoon, listeners. And it's always a pleasure to be on here. But the subject matter is not always pleasurable. So, yeah, let's try to make the best of what is a fairly bad situation.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with a mea culpa. There's a concept called doublethink. George Orwell invented, I think, in his book 1984. And it's the idea of holding two simultaneously contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time, right? So for some people, it can be they know evolution happened, but they believe in God, right? And there are plenty of others. I was guilty of this last week, Davey, because I know that the squad is rubbish. I sit and talk about it on these shows. I watch them every single game, and I realise that they are limited. They are limited, I think, physically. They are limited technically, and that's before you even get to qualities that are a wee bit more abstract, such as heart or desire or spirit or anything along those lines. And yet somehow I'd convinced myself that we were very much capable of going to Tynecastle, getting the result and going on and winning the title. And when I look back on it, I mean, it's illogical. What were the reasons for me thinking we were going to go to Tynecastle and beat Hearts? They weren't there. It was based on just, well, we will. And I suppose you could say that faith is a big part of being a football fan. But even so, I think I'm guilty of, on the one hand, knowing that this is a very bad squad, and yet when it comes to match day, expect them to be good. And I feel a bit of a gullible prat today.
Well, look, I don't think you're the only one, Davey, and I think that sometimes the flagship's akin to picking up the phone and calling the Samaritans. So we're all in it together, and I think I was in a very similar position. We went out for Sunday lunch yesterday with a couple of other families, and the TV already pre-booked, best seat in the house. As she said on the way out the door, says, it's been a long time since I've been as excited for a Rangers game. Really, really good feel-good factor about all this. And actually, in hindsight, when I think, as you say, logically, like I'd been to Budapest, and anyone with even a passing understanding of football would know by watching our game, would know we have not got all those qualities that you listed, Davy, to put any form of run together that would even resemble the title race. In fact, I was at Tannadice the week before as well. If you roll those two specific games together, I mean, if we're at Hampden at the end of the season for a Scottish Cup final, it will be, quite frankly, a Christmas miracle, because you're right. Why did we think and feel like that? I think probably because of the soap opera that's going on in the East End, which, yes, it's great, it's really entertaining, but actually it's totally irrelevant to us, because whether we like it or not, they are still a better footballing side, regardless of how many times they try to self-inflict damage on themselves. Probably an inherent arrogance, because, well, it's Hearts, and Hearts will not stay at the distance, will not have the stomach, all these things, simply because they play in maroon rather than blue or green hoops, and that's probably, well, are they going to be the first one to win the league, Aberdeen and all the rest? I think that when you sort of roll it all together, there is a kind of it became a bit of a positive sense, and I think probably, David, to sum it up, because of how bad it had been under Russell Martin, and the fact that we are getting a bit better in a way. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. It's almost a moot point, because I still stand by probably our best two performances of the season were Panathinaikos and Pilsen. So yeah, I don't even know where to start, because they're talking about a couple of steps forward and one back. Like, for every one step forward, we're going 5 or 6 back, and it's frustrating. And look, I'm sure we'll discuss recruitment, but I just don't know and see where we can get any sort of positive run together, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I would totally agree on that Hearts point. And I think that there is at least a little bit of that's historically based, but it's not really relevant to their team. We've seen teams challenge before and then drop off, although this is longer than certainly in the last few years. We've seen another team push. But I would have said, well, look, this Rangers team isn't great, but it's got better players than Hearts. And now I'm thinking, no, it doesn't. It's got more expensive players than Hearts. It's got better paid players than Hearts. But I don't think that it translates into they are better players than their Hearts equivalent. I'm sure individually a few might well be, but they're certainly not showing it, and therefore it's irrelevant. And the thing about yesterday was, again, you just felt that Hearts were more up for it and that they wanted it more. When it came to the crunch, and Danny Rule pointed out, the side was good at the start, which it was. It was decent, not great, but it was, very much competitive in the match. Could have taken the lead, but they cannot handle adversity, and we saw that again. And I think it's really interesting you brought up Budapest there, Dave, because this is, I think, the lesson that we have, and that I personally hadn't learned, which is this Rangers team is not very good, but it can get results. Danny Rule's put them into at least a recognisable shape, something Russell Martin never did. And he's made us more practical. He's more pragmatic. So it picks up results in Scotland. But as soon as we play a better side than that, average Scottish team level, we lose. And we've seen that in Europe this year. Now they're not doings because, again, Danny Rule has at least got them set up and, as I say, a recognisably footballing formation, unlike the previous incumbent of that role. But when it comes to that quality, that match-winning quality, we just simply don't have it.
Yeah, and I think the saddest indictment on our recruitment, which, look, let's be honest, we have regressed window after window for before Kevin Thelwell and before, we're going back quite a few seasons, if we're quite honest. And what concerns me is that, and you're right, the quality. There have been moments in the season where Giga just booting it out of the stand in the first seconds at Hampden made me think, right, well, there's an issue there in terms of the quality of footballer in there. There's the like of Joe Rothwell, who seems to have just fallen off a physical cliff. Numerous other signings that just stand out for all sorts of inherent technical weakness, physical weakness. But the thing that almost every Rangers player at the moment has in common is that mentally they just seem to be so fragile. The like of a Max Aarons just sums up for me almost everything that's wrong with a modern day professional footballer, and I just don't understand how anyone can have watched the players that we have brought in and can, I understand how recruitment works with statistics and compare player to player and data, and it's all data driven, and then you move. But essentially, any scout that knows anything about recruitment, you got to get your eyes on them. You don't sign a player without having physically seen them being at a match. I just don't understand how virtually any of our signings pass the test of, can they play for Rangers, have the ability to play for Rangers, because they simply don't. And I remember Bomber saying to me, do you remember Dalcio?
Yeah.
I remember Bomber saying the first couple of minutes of Dalcio's, I think, come on as a sub at Ibrox, and he just says, and look, this is maybe typical, a little bit too black and white, but he just says, nah, that boy will never play for Rangers. And it was based on the fact of he hadn't tracked back. He had just done something really basic that is required to be a winner at Rangers. And virtually every one of them fall into that bracket now, Davey, don't they?
I think it comes into the old, three-pronged attack to recruitment, and maybe it is too heavy. Well, Rangers was clearly too heavy on data, underlying data. Farewell spoke about that with some of the signings, the underlying data, and I know that clubs go for that. That's why Jefte, we got so much money for him, for example. So it is the industry standard at the moment, I suppose. But you need to see them. And then I think you need to speak to them. You need to sit down face to face with them, talk to them, and get the idea of what they're like as people, because that's a huge characteristic of playing for Rangers. You have to have a kind of an inner strength, and so far we don't really see it. The game itself, then I'll have my weekly officials complaint. This the VAR line technology that we use, the offside technology, it's not the same as is used in the big leagues because we use a cheap version, and it ain't fit for purpose, Dave. And this is not just based on Rangers yesterday. Now, I don't know if Miovski was offside, right? I don't think you can tell by looking at the pictures, but I'm no clearer to knowing if he was offside because of that VAR instruction. The lines look pretty debatable, to say the least. And the idea that you're bringing something in and saying it's definitive when it isn't definitive, if it was definitive, that's what they'd be using down south. They're not, for a reason, right? And I kind of think that if we're going to do that, then in a situation like that where I think you go, we can't really tell, there's various places you could draw the line, various times you could draw the lines. I think you just go with the offset, the decision on the ground. We've looked at this, we can't tell if the line was right or wrong, and you go with it. Now, of course, it would have went for us yesterday, so it's easy for me to sit here and say, but I know that when I watch other games in Scotland and you see it, that there's been some horrendous ones. There was a St Mirren one earlier this season. The technology is just piss poor. It's the Temu version of line checking, and we saw it again yesterday. Not the reason we lost. Well, if that goal stands, then who knows? I just don't like the idea of them saying, no, it's definitively offside, when it's like, is it? You're telling us that because of this technology, but this technology looks flawed.
Well, I think there are two issues here, and you're right. We'll then discuss the goal. Number one is it's as you said, it's the cheap version. So it's essentially the Timu version of it looks exactly the same or very close to the same, but actually when you look at the quality and you look at the durability of said product, it clearly is not able to. It's not as resilient, if you want to call it that. And I think that the issue is it also comes down to who is operating. So who's essentially in charge of the forklift. And this is part of the wider problem that we've got, is that I actually feel a degree of sympathy for officials in a league like ours, given the level of expectation on them, but the limited amount of support they get. And I remember, there's too many to remember, but in particular one instance where Kevin Clancy made a total balls of a midweek game up at Pataudry, and Ryan Kent gets sent off. But in his defence, he had spent the vast majority of that day in his day job in an office, and I think Edinburgh, jumping in the car to get up, in time for kickoff. Which clearly, if a player had done that, he would not be in anywhere near the available quality required. And this is the issue where we're giving officials a crap version of what's used in the big leagues, but then we're not, in my view, equipping them enough to actually get the best out of the situation and technology. And I think you're right, Davey. Technology's been brought in not just football, rugby, NFL, list goes on, cricket, and it's to limit or eradicate clear and obvious errors. So it's, the Thierry Henry against the Republic of Ireland 15 odd years ago, the handball. It's clear mistakes the ref or a linesman has missed. And to sum it up, yesterday, because the technology isn't able to give you a definitive answer, for me, it should then stay with the on field decision. Because if you can't use technology and reviews to help the ref, well, then you need to have the balls to hold up your hands, because at the moment, you're actually creating a bigger issue by trying to solve a smaller one.
Yeah, you're saying that this is correct all the time, has to be accepted, and I'm not sure that it can. Although, to be fair, the big man should just have put the ball straight in the net anyway. Fernandez, kind of loath to criticism, as he, for long spells yesterday, appeared to be our only threat. It came in the first half from set pieces. What annoyed me, Dave, was that for half an hour, I thought Rangers were doing very well and had taken the sting out the crowd, which, considering how up for it they were, was actually, pretty much, and that would have been the game plan. And we're in control. Things are going pretty well. Go on then and make it count and try things. There's no reason for the confidence levels to be low, any of that stuff. And then at a corner, we fall asleep, and this is just piss poor. This is basic. And I think that this is one where I do speak to saying, look, this is not just the coaches or players. This is both, because we get left 2-on-1 at a corner. How does that happen? Right? I mean, how can that happen? Because of course, what's going to happen is you have to run to the guy with the ball. He just passes it to the other guy. It's exactly what happened. He's now got time to pick out across any level. That's dangerous if you give a footballer time and space. It's a brilliant cross. It's a brilliant header. But again, who's marking at the header? Everybody's in the wee zone. I just thought this was a bloody awful goal to concede. As good as it was from Hearts' point of view, by the way, because they worked it really well.
I was actually sitting beside a former Linfield centre half who was particularly critical because of the failure to act with the change of direction. So whenever the ball's been played and then backheeled, we actually go flat-footed. So at the start, it looks like when you watch it in real time, we've stepped up and almost sort of bought their dummy. But actually, it's worse because it's actually created us to be flat-footed. And from memory, you've got Fernandez, who I think's our tallest player and certainly our outfield player. And then you've got wee Barron in beside him, and your man's literally nipped in between the two. And it's actually one of those ones where if it happened in training, you'd be going ballistic, never mind a live game. And it does look, I don't want to be one of these, right? We've made a shit show of a set piece, start being really critical of our set piece coach. But we've brought the new set piece guy in, and I've observed him in a couple of real time matches where you can see the dugout where he's coming out and his hands are up and he's like a sort of like a cheerleader. But I again don't see any visible sign of progression in this particular part of the field. And maybe people say I'm being too critical and I'm jumping the gun, but like going back to the point, if you're ever going to try to be in a title race, you cannot concede goals like that. That's just the bread and butter, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. And yeah, and it comes about, of course, because Butland has made an arse of a goal kick. We're under no pressure. Similar situation happened in Budapest, actually, where he's got the ball in his hand. We're coming up to half time and he just launched it straight into their box. They had an attack from which they scored. And that's not solely his mistake because there is still time to recover from it. But it's something that has happened a few times this season when our use of the ball lacks intelligence and puts us in trouble. There is no defending of him for the second goal. Now, again, it's a situation where you can talk about the defending because allowing Shankland to have the shot from there. But when Shankland hits that shot, he doesn't think he's scoring, right? It's a hit and hope. What he's hoping for is obviously a mistake, but more likely thinks, get the shot in, get the corner at worst, right? Just get it on target. Because there's no way it's going through the goalkeeper. The only place it can go is where the goalkeeper is standing or it hits the post. So he's a clever enough striker to know that. Butland has to go some to concede this, which he does. He gets confused rather than just dealing with it. Actually decides then to go for it with his knee, moves his leg out the way, which creates the space, can't get to it with his knee. It goes right through him. And it's a dismal goal to concede. And again, Butland, there seems to be a pattern where he starts seasons well and then gradually gets worse, and it's happening again.
Shankland's goal reminded me it was almost Kyle Lafferty in his pomp where chases a lost cause. I get the impression that both the defender and Butland think, he's gone so wide for the angle. He does do very well, Shankland, to actually create.
Terrific finish. He puts it the only place it can go in.
Yeah, he does, to be fair, and I'm sure we'll have a discussion over Shankland in due course. But Butland, and I've said this on probably the second, third time I've said this on pods about Butland, where there are moments where he makes saves almost akin to Alan McGregor, where especially when you're at a match, and it seems to be quite a lot away from home as well, where you're a bit like, bloody hell, where did that come out of? You're like, that was a save. One of those saves that he shouldn't have made, if that makes sense. And then you're sort of in your head saying, like, oh, like we've done really well to get Butland. Like, Butland's a good keeper. Obviously, you can see why he was, close to the England squad, etc. And then there are other moments where, and sometimes actually in the same game, where you're like, fucking hell. Like, I mean, you wouldn't, if Mason Munn was in that, you would have limited sympathy for him letting it in.
He's got to save it. I mean, any goalkeeper, any professional goalkeeper, that's a howler.
But the problem with it is it happens too often, and I think what it does is it epitomizes with respect to us, why Jack Butland's with us and he's not in a Premiership team. And again, to go back to it, and I'm repeating myself now, to get into any sort of a title race, you simply cannot concede goals like that. And that's the frustration with both goals. They were, in my view, self-inflicted, and they were both preventable.
Here's the then difficult part. We go in at half-time, we're 2 down, out of nowhere, really, right? Because game had been even up to that point, but we go down and we're 2 down. Against the Derek McInnes team at the best of times, that's pretty difficult because he can set them up to defend and hit you on the break. When he's got good players to do that and quick forward players, you can be in bother. And I think the mess that Rangers were in the second half is demonstrated by an incident after just a few minutes. Rangers have a throw-in towards the Hearts box in their half. And we wave all the big guys forward. So it's going to be a long throw-in. And we then take it short and lose it between Aarons and Tavernier. And Hearts sweep forward with a 4-on-3. Now, they choose the wrong pass, thankfully. And it comes to nothing. But that is scrambled thinking. That is a complete lack of clear thinking. It's doing two things that are contradictory. You wave your defenders forward, and then you fuck about on the wing, lose the ball, and all your defenders are forward because you've moved them 60 yards forward. That cannot happen. That is scrambled brains. Now, I'm pretty sure the manager hasn't told them to do that. But even so, again, they all have to take responsibility for that because that is amateurish.
Yeah, it's just a lack of ability to, think clearly under pressure. And I think, it just shows, and it goes back to the type of profile of player that we've got. I hate harking back to the past and say, it was great when we had insert name, but we just don't seem to have anyone in the pitch who can give us any level of control. And I don't even necessarily mean like a sort of Stephen Davis, a Barry Ferguson. I mean, I just think anyone who is in any way a leader by their actions, it's just a collection. And that's why I said, like, when the team comes out against Motherwell, it's kind of, you shrug your shoulders because there's no one this season who's put their hand up, in my view, to say, I deserve to start. And I'd probably include the goalkeeper and everyone else in it,
Yeah. And then, from then on, I don't think the team believed that they could turn it round because we get the consolationiest of consolation goals in the last seconds. And fair play to Chermiti. It's a very good goal. I wish he would show that sort of intent throughout the rest of the game because what he did there is use his size, his pace, his power. And I've said Hearts wanted it more. He wanted that more than Kent and took advantage of the error. He's big enough that he should be doing that to centre halves and a very tidy finish as well. I don't have the energy right now to go. Hopefully this gives him confidence and goes in a run because, if it does, by the way, Dave, and he's got 9 in the next 10, I will apologise and say, yeah, that was the moment that kick-started his Rangers career. But right now, I don't really have the energy to do that. Now, let's look at some of the players individually. And yes, I am going to pick on a few players here, listeners. So I'm sorry if it's someone you like is about to cop it. And I'll start off with Max Aarons. He's a dreadful footballer. I mean, his one move is to receive a pass, take 2 steps forward. As soon as he encounters any opposition, stop, turn round and pass it back. And yesterday, there was actually an interesting moment where he totally panicked because he did that and Hearts had blocked the pass back to the defender. So he then had to turn back round and you could see him panicking because his only option was to drive forward with the ball or to lump it. So, of course, he lumped it because that advocated him of responsibility. Tav is done. His legs are away and they're not doing what his brain is telling it to do. You can see that yesterday. There was a moment where he got the ball and just completely launched out of play. He's getting caught in the ball constantly by opposition players. The midfield three, Barron gives you effort, but he's limited in terms of ability. Raskin is phoning it in. There's no doubt about that in my mind. and Diamande is actually moving from just being bad to being a liability, because again, they are 2 minutes to half time, we're 2-0 down, and he does one of his, I'm just going to chuck myself over the top into a tackle. He's already had red cards for it this season. That was shocking. That was unprofessional. That was get me out of here. No wonder he was hooked at half time. And it's a midfield that is utterly devoid of creativity, but it's so slow. It wants far too many touches on the ball to just play simple passes, never mind killer passes, which put us in trouble. And yesterday, it got harried and pressed by Devlin in particular, just completely out the game.
Yeah, I would also like to add the fact that Danilo, out of all the players that I think need to be farmed out, just needs to go. I don't know what Danilo's contribution is anymore. And that's not even, that's just in general. The only argument, yeah, Max Aaron's shite bag. The midfield three, you're right. Connor Barron is a nice worker, works really hard. You know, we got him generally cheap. You know, probably a good influence, professional around the place. But yeah, there's no real football in him. Raskin is just going to become another Morelos or Kent, where they've gone from being, you know, a real sizable asset to will inevitably leave either on the cheap or for nothing. The only slight, and again, like listeners will say, I have a bit of personal skin in the game, having worked with him, but I actually still think that Tav has a role in the squad and the club, given that, you know, and people can debate this with me all day long, but and some will say, well, it's an indictment of where we are that I'm saying this, but I still think that, yeah, I mean, he's been moved between roles, which you have to give a degree of sympathy for. If you do look back to the game at Hampden recently, where I think he did play 3, 4 positions, 5 at one stage of the game, I actually remember saying, and I might have even said it to Pod, where I was basically, you know, Tav, when he plays anywhere near his abilities, still arguably one of our best players, which again highlights how poor our recruitment's been. But yeah, in terms of in terms of that squad, okay, obviously John Suter will hopefully be back sooner rather than later, and again, it is a improvement on what we've got. You know, whether it is Fernandez, obviously Nasala, I just don't think that we've got, in my view, anyone at the minute at the back who instills any level of confidence whatsoever. I don't think there's anyone in the midfield that gives you any level of creativity where you think, well, give them the ball and they might make something. Gassama was kind of that creative player who seems to be regressing to the point where I think he lost his coordination entirely at one point yesterday. And as for the goal threat up front, well, there isn't one, and that's the issue. I mean, I would understand if we were really solid at the back and we just had to kind of grind out nick wee goals here or there, or understand if we're banging them in from all angles. You would afford to have weaknesses in the defence and outscore the opposition. But at the minute, we're just weak right across the team. There's no spine to talk of. And like in January, like I just don't see who or what we can bring in. Setting aside even our total lack of faith in recruitment recently, I don't even know where you would start, and unless literally you're bringing in, you know, virtually an entire new starting 11, to be quite frank, and that's not going to happen, especially in January.
No, and I think that, you know, you need to look at it and say, right, clearly, because I think it's a legit say to say is real too defensive, but it's because he doesn't trust them to score goals, and he's right not to, and I suppose because they're not creative, and we know that. But yesterday he's gone with an extra man at the back, but because of injuries, etc., the personnel that we have are two fullbacks and the fourth choice centre half.
Mm-hmm.
That's making up our defence for a game at Tynecastle. And you know, clearly you're not going to get very far with that, particularly, especially when, as we've touched on, you don't have the match winners up the park, because that makes the difference psychologically. I mean, the Walter teams, yes, it was really solid at the back, but what it knew was there were always guys at the other end of the pitch in Walter's second era who could win you the game. You know, Jelic at Tynecastle springs to mind. That if we do our job, somebody will, you know, we can trust up there, and that isn't there for Rangers because we don't have that. There's been some criticism of Danny Rule and that will happen after such a limp performance yesterday. I was interested in Stephen Gerrard's comments, David, when he said that I'm not a magician. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's an interview he did with Ali McCoy for TNT Sports, and he spoke about if he couldn't fix it if there weren't the right people around him. And I think initially I'd kind of thought it was Thelwell and Stewart, but then I think that, well, he's bright enough to know he would win that battle. Plus, the fact that they were getting sacked in a month suggests that they were on a sugary peg, and he'd have picked that up. Speaking to Kavanagh and Marat, he's too sharp not to. So again, only he knows. But my take on it is that he looked at the squad and went, I can't succeed with that. And then another, where he currently is in his managerial career, if he goes in and fails somewhere, he's probably done. And I think that he's looked at the squad and just went, that's just can't be done. Which kind of means that I'm thinking, well, Jesus, is any manager on a hiding to nothing at the moment? And look, I'm not naive. I realise if Roll keeps losing game, I'll be calling for him to go, never mind everybody else. But I do think that we're sort of expecting someone to get stuff out. Basically, I suppose my worry is, say it happens and we do go on a losing game and they sack Rule. At this point, are we just unmanageable because the expectation is not going to be met. There simply are not the tools to build the thing that we want built at the moment. And, I get somebody said to me, but David, he's not improved any of the players. And I said, well, actually, this is I've got a slightly more worrying and chilling view of that. I think he has, and this is their level. What you mean is that he hasn't improved them to being significantly better. My concern is this might be it for a lot of them. This is what this team can produce, which is scary.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. In fact, I don't think any of the listeners will disagree at all either. I think the issue we've got is for Danny Rowell. Even if you look at the next two games coming up, I don't think there'll be too many people put money in us getting 6 points from 6, let alone before you go to Parkhead, then the double header with Aberdeen. So by the middle of January, we could be not only almost statistically out of the title race, we're literally battling it out with Motherwell and Aberdeen for that sort of third place position. And I think that part of the issue, and you're right, like at what point do we start to ask questions over Danny Rowell? And this is not me, listeners, in any way starting to lay the groundwork for, red lines in Danny Rowell's face, because I think one thing is he's come in, he's conducted himself with professionalism, with class. He is not. I don't know how I was going to describe Russell Martin without.
No, I think
but
we all know what you mean there.
Yeah,
Yes, I agree with that. He's kind of connected in terms of looking like a Rangers manager.
Yeah.
Not what he is, Dave, that we're sending a guy into battle with a pea shooter and a rock, and then being surprised that he's getting beat.
Yeah, you're right to say, look, that about him essentially not having the tools. But in the same sentence, the only way, and again, this isn't me advocating for bring back Barry and Billy Dodds, but Barry was able to get sort of a tune out of the
at times.
At
times, there were a lot of poor performances
record at times, and statistically, it was not good at times. But he was able, Davey, to get a sense of a bit of chest thumping and a bit of emotion and a win away to Fenerbahce and that Parkhead victory and that was all great, nice wee moments, but there was no longevity in it. But at the moment with that particular squad that Danny Rowell has got, if Big Sam had fallen out of the sky, or I think the Stephen Gerrard incident where Stephen Gerrard, the amount of times he talked about needing people to step up, there are very few men in that squad, certainly by Stephen Gerrard's definition, and that's the issue we've got. Where if Danny Rowell did get to a position where we said, right, he's we've had enough, we're going to have to change. I actually don't know who could do any better than Danny Role at the moment. Do you know what I mean? And
that's exactly what I mean. It's like, so people understandably can focus on Danny Rule, right? And if he goes on a losing run, Rangers managers get sacked. We know that, right? And I hope he doesn't. I don't think he will, right? Not a constant one. But the fact is that people, he could then go, and then we bring somebody else in, and I just think it would be the same because I genuinely, I think that, and it's, to me, that's worse actually than just going, what's a dud manager, because then you just change your manager. It's a dud squad, and that's more work and more to do.
But the bigger, Davey, the bigger concern, I think all listeners have this as well. We, in my view, need probably 3, dare I say, perfect windows where this January, this summer, and next January, you're bringing in arguably 4 to 5 on average per window to have between 12 and 15 new players.
Yeah.
And that perfect window needs to be 4 to 5 in and 4 to 5 out, where you progress window after window. And given that I can't remember the last time we had even 2 good windows in a row.
A passable one.
Passable. Yeah. You're probably going back to almost pre-COVID.
2020, summer 2020.
Yeah,
that's the last one.
Yeah, probably, when even we go slightly back further, when you were bringing in the like of sort of Davis and Defoe, where you're saying, right, well, it's not a long-term thing, but it's a little bit of an improvement on what we had. But, at the moment, I just think that's where we're at. And look, if Danny Role loses, I don't know what your number would be, but a certain number of games in a row, I think, fuck, this just isn't going to work, then that's a separate conversation. But I think at the moment, to be fair to whoever's in the dugout, until there's a marked difference in terms of the quality of player, both the technical quality and the mental quality, if there's such a thing, the level in terms of bravery and heart and backbone and spine, etc., then really, in a way, if Danny Role keeps conducting himself as he's doing, then I think he will continue to buy himself a decent amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that given the state of this season, then he needs to be there at the end of the season regardless, and we'll just see where we are from there. But it is a mess. Right then, folks, well, not a very cheery one to send you into Christmas with, but Merry Christmas anyway. If you're looking for a last-minute present, you can sign people up for a subscription to our Patreon site. No hassle whatsoever. Just go to patreon.com/heartandhand/gift, and you can do it, and it's done, and you give them the joy of the Heart and Hand Patreon site. Thank you to David for joining me today.
Thank you, David. Thank you, listeners. And the next game is the biggest game.
Always. Anyway, folks, I hope you have, if you have a wonderful Christmas, if that's your thing. If you're not a Christmas person, then I hope you get through it. Okay, and we will be back next week. Cam will be here later in the week to preview that Motherwell game on Friday. So until then, folks, have a splendid week. I'll talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.